How's it going, everyone? I'm Nick, and you're listening to episode 37 of the Fresh Perspective podcast. How can we deal with the terrible injustices of life? How can we carry on when we are asked to do the impossible? Does your happiness depend more on your circumstances or your attitude? The ancient Stoics, including Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, had some powerful answers to these questions that have survived since ancient Greece and Rome. Today, I'm accompanied by my friend Sam Wagner for a 6-part conversation about this fascinating philosophy and what freethinkers like you can learn from it. This program is brought to you by our local Free Thought Forum. We help those in need of an inclusive, supportive, and free-thinking community by hosting public discussions on moral philosophy, healthy living, and science to improve the cohesion, health, and scientific literacy of our society. Everyone is welcome, regardless of personal background, religious belief, political leanings, etc., to participate in these open and civil discussions every week. To find a Free Thought Forum meeting near you, or to join this week's online group meetings, please visit freethoughtforum.org. Part 1. The Study of Stoicism. No greater thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer you that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. Epictetus. Zeno of Citium, like many of us, searched for direction in his life. As a young man, he visited his local oracle, who said that he should take on the complexion of the dead. He would later interpret this advice to mean that he needed to study the wisdom of long-dead philosophers. Although Zeno was a wealthy merchant, he lived a modest life. After surviving a violent shipwreck, he dedicated even more of his time to studying the words of his favorite philosophers, such as Socrates and Plato. After his death, his teachings were joined by those of great Stoic writers such as Seneca the Younger, Epictetus, a former slave, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Through several generations, Stoicism went on to influence Christianity and inspire great thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas, Spinoza, Nelson Mandela, and Viktor Frankl. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong as its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by, and another takes its place, and this too will be swept away." Today I'm joined by Sam Wagner, an assistant group leader for the Free Thought Forum, a well-read student of philosophy, and an educator working now at Utah Valley University. To start with, Sam, I'd like to ask, what drew you to study Stoicism in the first place, and why do you think that this is an important thing for people to study these days?
All right, thanks, Nick. Just as a disclaimer right at the beginning, I'm not a credentialed expert. My background is in the sciences. I began my interest in Stoicism shortly after my faith transition. During a time of my life when I was doing a lot of soul searching, I was hoping to find, a philosophy or a worldview that could guide my life. I first came across Stoicism from a podcast by the philosopher Massimo Pigliucci. The podcast was Rationally Speaking. So as far as what we should study it, I think it's very appropriate for the present moment. Right now, we're in the midst of the coronavirus. Most of us are staying inside so we can prevent the spread. Stoicism is a philosophy that's extremely practical. It's one that can help us deal with the challenges that come up. It's really counterintuitive in a lot of ways. A lot of times when we deal with challenges, we just react emotionally. Stoicism instead asks us to take a step back, to understand the situation rationally, and to use our rational understanding of the situation to respond in a way that corresponds with our highest ideals, something that corresponds to the 4 classical virtues that the Stoics had. In history, there's examples. So, for example, Viktor Frankl, who was mentioned, and James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war. This philosophy helped individuals like that deal with these really awful circumstances. Even though it's a philosophy that has helped, prisoners of war and Holocaust victims, it's also a philosophy that can help us with more typical issues that come up. such as challenges that we have at work or challenges that come up in relationships. Over the last few years, I've read up on it. It's a topic that I love talking about, and I'm happy to be here today to discuss it.
I'd like to know a little more about these famous Stoic philosophers. An interesting quote comes from Seneca, the teacher of Nero, who said, "What need is there to weep over the parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears." What can you tell us about the context of this quote and of Seneca himself?
All right, so one way that the Stoics deal with challenges is they deal with them before they come up. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not about reacting to things when they occur. In any life, no matter whose it is, you're going to meet challenges. You're going to have tragedies. You're going to have difficulties that come up. In Stoic philosophy, instead of waiting until they occur, you prepare yourself emotionally and even physically before you have to face them. Yeah, so the context of the quote occurred when Seneca was sentenced to death by Nero for being in a plot to assassinate him, although a lot of people think that he was entirely innocent. He was Nero's teacher, but Nero didn't really follow his teachings super well. So Seneca was sentenced to death. He knew he was going to die, and his family, his wife, and kids were in tears. And so that's the context of the quote. The what need is there to weep over the parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. In Stoic philosophy, there's a couple ideas which might help us put this quote into context. What Seneca may have been saying is that to his wife and children, you knew that there was going to be tragedies your entire life. That this is something you've been preparing for. There's also kind of looking at the bigger context of things, recognizing that things that occur are part of a greater whole. So one analogy that's often given is if you get mud on your boot, it's not great for the foot, but the foot's fulfilling an important purpose for the whole. If you think back to the example of Socrates, Socrates, of course, was a role model for a lot of these Stoics. He was sentenced to death, much like Seneca, for a reason he shouldn't have been, and was forced to drink hemlock. And even though he was given many opportunities to escape, he turned the opportunities down. Well, in dying and standing by his principles, Socrates set an example for many future philosophers to come, recognizing that Seneca's action, his execution, was going to be part of a greater whole. Could have also been something that could be a source of comfort. About Seneca himself, Seneca is, as far as all the Stoic writers, the three that really have complete writings that we turn to are Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and then, of course, Seneca. Seneca is probably the easiest person to read. He deals with just everyday issues that come up, and his writing is just very simple. Marcus Aurelius kind of rambles, and Epictetus is, for the most part, easy to read, but he gets into some deep philosophy too. Seneca is, if you're just looking for some light reading and some really easy to digest good advice, Seneca's the person to turn to.
Part 2. Before correcting others, improve yourself. What does it mean to live a good life? Several philosophical schools in ancient Greece attempted to answer this question, such as the Epicureans. They taught that the ideal life was filled with pleasures and the avoidance of pain and fear. The Stoics, on the other hand, believed that the good life could be realized if one lived virtuously. Epictetus taught the essence of philosophy is that a man should so live that his happiness should depend as little as possible on external things. Sam, what would you say are the major differences between Stoicism and other schools of thought?
Well, Stoicism emerged shortly after Socrates, at the same time as many other schools of thought. One that's, of course, really famous is Aristotle. Aristotle was a student of Plato, so kind of the intellectual grandson. Aristotle had this idea of the golden mean. So there's things in life like health and money. And Aristotle's idea was that you don't want to go to extremes. You need to have enough, but you don't have to have this overabundance. There was another school of thought that was radically different than Aristotle's. This school of thought was that of the Cynics. So the Cynics believed that to live a good life, all you had to be was to live virtuously, and things like money and wealth, they didn't matter at all. It was actually even more extreme than that. The Cynics believed that you should purposely avoid the things that most people go after, that money's a distraction, and that you shouldn't be part of the rat race that everyone's a part of. The most famous cynic was Diogenes, and he took this to an extreme. He actually lived in a barrel or ceramic pot just in the streets, and in a lot of ways he was an extremist. He would just mock bystanders as they would pass and pedestrians. In fact, he made fun of Aristotle. There's a story, which I don't know if it's a true story or if it's anecdotal, but Aristotle had this idea that man is an animal on two legs without feathers. And so Diogenes actually plucked a chicken and said, "This is Aristotle's man," and just, let it loose. But Stoicism is, of course, different than Aristotle's view and the view of the Cynics. In the Stoic view, instead of having to just reject money or health, or the pursuit of the things that people typically go after, you can take them if they come to you. You just can't let them get in the way of being a good person. And so I think Stoicism really distinguishes itself if you happen to end up in circumstances where you can't get things like money or health, where the good things in life are just utterly deprived of you. Stoicism says, hey, you can still be a good person. There's still a way that you can live a good life.
So would you say that the Cynics were the hipsters of their day?
Yeah, they were often homeless on the streets. They were definitely.
With virtuous living made paramount, followers focused on their own character development before attempting to correct others. If thy brother wrongs thee, Epictetus taught, remember not so much his wrongdoing, but more than ever that he is thy brother. Living virtuously is something within the reach of every human being. It means personally and completely adopting ethical characteristics such as temperance, courage, wisdom, and harmony. We develop character as we live virtuously, accept responsibility, and close the gap between what we are doing and what we are capable of doing. This quest to realize one's greatest potential was considered by the Stoics to be the only true good and life's most important purpose. According to Seneca, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. As far as I understand it, Sam, virtue, character, and life's purpose for the Stoics were all intertwined. What else can you share with us about this idea of living virtuously?
Yeah, I think when we hear the word virtue, a lot of our backgrounds in modern times, we view it differently than people in ancient Greece and Rome would have seen it. A lot of times when we think of living virtuously, we think in terms of moral purity or chastity. But for people in ancient times, it was a lot more than that. Living virtuously had to do with living ethically. There's actually a quote that I would like to share from Marcus Aurelius. It says, "Humans have come into being for the sake of each other, so either teach them or learn to bear them." A lot of people think that Stoicism is just really about not having feelings, not having emotions. It's a completely dispassionate philosophy. That's really not accurate at all. Stoicism is a very social philosophy. There's emotions such as the desire to be good that are really at the core of Stoicism. Instead of not having emotions, Stoicism's really about letting reason direct your actions. Part of letting reason direct your actions is trying to do what the Stoics refer to as living in accord with nature. And there's different ideas as far as what it means to live in accord with nature. But my interpretation of it is that it has to do with living rationally, understanding the world as it is, understanding your own nature, and then trying to find a harmony between those two things. I think one way to think of it is if you imagine that you're on your deathbed and you're thinking back on how your life has gone, and you're going through things that you regret, things that you're happy about. My guess is that things like wealth, money, reputation are going to be less important than the things that have to do with living virtuously, being kind to other people, helping others with their issues, forming social connections. The things that when you're on the deathbed that you'll really value are the types of things that you will get when you exemplify, the four cardinal virtues, temperance, courage, wisdom, and harmony.
Part 3. Let your hardships refine you, not define you. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them. Epictetus. When life's challenges arise, it is common to think of oneself as the victim of the story rather than its hero. We may believe that we are entitled to some level of happiness or comfort, but this is an idea completely rejected by the Stoics. We should focus on the things we can control, such as our reactions, judgments, and personal improvement, rather than worry about the things outside our control, such as other people, our upbringing, or the weather. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love, and you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." We can't control what goes on around us, but we can control our mindset. Someone with a Stoic mindset, for example, may reframe and recontextualize their negative experiences as opportunities to calmly respond with dignity and heroism. According to Epictetus, the greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms and tempests. Now, Sam, some people may think that the Stoics are saying that everything happens for our benefit or that everything happens for a reason. But that really isn't the point here, is it?
There's many Stoics that have this idea of providence, which is very similar in a lot of ways to kind of the religious idea that comes up a lot. But you also find that they're really humble. So, for example, Marcus Aurelius is kind of open to the idea that everything's atoms that are just, bumping into each other, which is an Epicurean idea. In order to be a Stoic, you don't have to subscribe to the idea that the world is the way it should be. I think that what you can do instead is recognize that there's things that are outside of your control, things that are just going to be the way they are, and that if you direct your energy just to regretting that the world isn't the way it should be, you're going to waste a lot of your effort. Learning to accept the world as it is and learning to accept the fact that there's things that you can't change. I think that that's wisdom that you can take from Stoicism without having to believe that we live in the best of all possible worlds.
Part 4. Money is just a means to an end. For the wise man regards wealth as a slave, the fool as a master. Seneca. Living virtuously is life's most important purpose, and the pursuits of wealth, health, fame, or pleasure are irrelevant. According to Stoicism, our common preferences for these comforts and pleasures are not necessarily good or bad, but are preferred indifference. They are things that we may prefer, but are not relevant or necessary for living a virtuous life or developing our ethical character. If we have opportunity, we can accept them, but our happiness should not depend on these unreliable luxuries. Now, Sam, this approach may seem strange to us in the United States, but this idea of preferred indifference is a major part of a Stoic's life, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In fact, it's really what distinguished Stoicism from a lot of the other philosophies that were around at the same time, especially Cynicism. With the preferred indifference, actually, one easy way to remember a lot of them is there's synonyms that start with P's. So, for example, you can talk about profit, pleasure, I think preference, for reputation. Power is another one that starts with a P. These are things that in, the Western world, we're just really conditioned to seek after. We want to get more and more money. when you try to get more money or more power or more pleasure or more luxuries of any kind, what can happen is that your appetite grows as you satisfy things more and more. It's a lot like addiction. Your cravings go up. This addiction, this craving, can be, an incredible source of discomfort. There's celebrities that we could look at that you could probably name a few who seem to have everything. They have money, they have fame, they have everything that you think would be necessary to have a good life, and yet they struggle with depression and sadness. Stoicism does something very counterintuitive. Instead of seeking after, money and pleasure, you treat it like a banquet. As previously mentioned, preferred indifference are things that we prefer to have. Everyone likes to have, an additional amount of money, but they're indifferent because they're irrelevant to being a good person. And so they're irrelevant to the type of thing that on your deathbed that you'd be happy that you had. And so the idea is treat the things in life like at a banquet. If something comes by and passes by you, you can put it on your plate, but you can't do anything unethical in order to get it. And if something passes by you completely, don't reach out for it, trying to get it back, just let it pass on.
Part 5. Don't fight the natural flow of the universe. In our modern society, our culture values the hero who can triumph against all odds, the self-made man and the underdog who can change the world. Americans generally don't like to be told what we can't do. In contrast, the Stoics believed that the universe has been set in a kind of determined motion. Rather than being like a salmon swimming upstream, a better life comes from going with the flow, so to speak. It is our job to recognize that things just happen and accept them as they are. Sam, to some of our listeners, this sounds a lot like the Stoics didn't believe in free will. Was that the case? And what can you tell us about Stoic physics?
In discussions about philosophy, there's a lot of confusion because free will can be used in two different ways. One way that free will is used is this idea of acting independently, not having to depend at all on previous events that happened, being able to have been able to do otherwise. And Stoics wouldn't believe in that type of free will. However, there is another definition of free will. This definition of free will has to do with being able to act independently, being able to make deliberate choices. This type of free will that many compatibilists, which are philosophers who believe in free will and determinism, like Daniel Dennett, I think is completely consistent with Stoicism. This is actually one really common misunderstanding. A lot of people think that Stoicism is a passive philosophy, that it's just about kind of enduring everything that happens. But if you actually look at Stoic writings, they're constantly encouraging their readers to exemplify virtue and to do good things in their life. And so Stoicism actually isn't a passive philosophy at all. As far as Stoic physics is incredibly interesting. The Stoics believed that the universe began in a great cosmic fire, and that from there was kind of a web of cause and effect that everything came from. There's two parts of this universe in Stoic thought. One part of the universe is passive. The Stoics were materialists, and they believed that everything was made of matter. But they also believed that this matter was acted upon by this rational, active element in the universe. Additionally, the Stoics believed that we have this active, rational element in ourselves, and that it's what we can use to live according to nature.
Part 6. Keep a calm mind. We are too much accustomed to attribute to a single cause that which is the product of several, and the majority of our controversies come from that. Marcus Aurelius. A Stoic belief that I especially appreciate is one that sounds surprisingly scientific. It relates to one's relationship with the facts of nature. If your ideas conflict with how nature operates, then that can understandably cause all kinds of emotional, logical, and societal problems. Epictetus said, "Do not seek to bring things to pass in accordance with your wishes, but wish for them as they are, and you will find them." According to the Stoics, negative emotions come from misunderstandings and should be controlled and corrected. We should not let negative, impulsive emotions control us. We should instead use our reason to cultivate positive emotions such as gratitude and love. Start by aligning your thinking with the nature of reality. An accurate understanding of the world gives rise to joy and the desire to live well and to do good. The term "keep a calm mind" encapsulates so many Stoic teachings, Sam. What are a few other important ideas that I've missed?
Yeah, I think that was really good just there. As far as keeping a calm mind, that's something that we don't just do in the moment. As I've mentioned earlier, it's something that we prepare for our entire lives. In order to do this, the Stoics had a number of exercises that they would do. For example, one Stoic exercise is that when you wake up in the morning, you think about what virtues, which of the four classical cardinal virtues you might be called upon to exercise during that day. You anticipate what challenges may arise and how you can use the different virtues to meet them in a noble way. Another Stoic exercise that they would often do is they would imagine bad things happening to them. So, for example, if you're worried about losing your job, you might imagine actually losing your job and imagining how you would change your life in order to meet that challenge. Another Stoic exercise I think is really good is expanding your circle of concern. You start just by imagining yourself. Then you might imagine your family, those who you see on a day-to-day basis. From there, you can imagine everybody in your community. Eventually, you could get to the point where you're imagining the entire human family. I think you could extend it even further and imagine conscious animals. I haven't practiced those exercises on a regular basis. One that I've missed, though, is actually making yourself deal with a hardship. It's actually very similar to what we did this past week with the Temperance Festival, where you gave up coffee. I gave up online chess for a week. Giving up a luxury that you enjoy and like just to increase your willpower and to learn to live without it is a Stoic practice that they would follow. Another one is, let's say you enjoy, lying in bed. Yeah, I think Marcus Aurelius wrote something about how, man wasn't made, to lie in sheets. But if you really enjoy lying in exercise that you could do to get yourself used to challenges would be you could go camping and sleep on the hard ground. Doing so would make it so that you'd have greater resolve just in case you're put in a situation where you're forced to do that. On top of that, by getting up, sleeping on a mattress in a bed for a day, you learn to have greater appreciation for times when you're able to have the good things.
Out of all the things we've talked about, what do you think is the number one takeaway for modern people? What main principle out of Stoicism should we be sure to emulate?
When we decide to make choices, we should focus on what we really want to accomplish. I think that for most people, if after long and careful reflection, exemplifying a good character is much more important than getting money, reputation, and fame. And so putting living virtuously as a priority is really what's essential to Stoicism. And then just recognizing that there's things about the world that we can't change.
Would you say that Vulcans in Star Trek follow Stoicism?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, Stoicism is different. Stoicism has some positive emotions. It's not wrong, to have feelings. You just can't let the feelings control you. The rational part of yourself needs to be in control. The feelings are a part of your nature, but they're subordinate to your reason. Actually, in Stoicism, you have this division between good emotions and bad emotions. Joy, for example, is a good emotion. Caution is another good emotion, but fear is a bad emotion, and like craving is another bad emotion. I think that Stoics, their ideal is to not let these impulsive emotions have any control, not ever giving into anger, not ever giving into wrath. Stoics definitely feel emotions, especially the desire to be good, in certain situations.
What criticisms do you have for Stoicism, or how can it be improved?
Uh, so, Stoicism being a rational philosophy, none of the Stoic philosophers thought that their words needed to be taken dogmatically. I even have some quotes where they recognize that future improvements would be made, especially in the domain of physics, but even in other domains. One thing that might be a little bit too strong in Stoicism is this idea of things in our control. A lot of times, things can happen in life. There can be situations that arise that we don't know whether they're in our control or not. It's not something we necessarily know ahead of time. It's instead of things being in or out of our control, it being a sharp distinction, it really exists along a continuum. And so, one improvement that can be made to Stoicism is recognizing that somehow or another we have to find a way to deal with these ambiguities, things that may or may not be in our control. But anyway, one thing I really like about Stoicism is that even if there's parts of it that I don't fully subscribe to or don't believe in, Stoicism is a very easy philosophy to steal, man. I feel like the Stoics were really asking the right questions. And so even when they make a statement that appears to be too strong, there's often a way to improve it. So, for example, we had this idea that you should only wish for things to be the way that they are. That's something that comes up in Epictetus, that you shouldn't wish that things that were out of your control are different. So one example might be if you have a family member that lives on the other side of the country that you don't really have a direct influence on their day-to-day life. It might be out of your control whether something good or bad happens to them, but that's something you would still deeply care about. I don't think that to be a good Stoic, you have to give up that care for the family member who's living far enough away that their life isn't in your control. I think that one way you can still man that idea is to direct your efforts onto things that'll make the world a better place.
Sam, you are not just a scholar, you are also a gentleman. Thank you for being on the podcast today, and we look forward to having you on here again.
I appreciate that. I think that's good. Thanks for having me on.
If you have enjoyed this conversation or have learned something from it, please leave a like, subscribe, and share it with other open-minded people. All of those things really do make a big difference and help others find our group and our podcast. Thank you. That is all I have for you today, but the conversation continues across social media and in the comment sections below. Do you agree with today's message? Am I mistaken about some detail? What feedback or ideas do you have for this program or our organization? Feel free to share your perspective. A special shout out goes to Penny Davis, Dale Thurber, PhD, and Brooke Freeman. Your monthly support makes this all possible. To check out our awesome donor rewards starting at $1 per month, please visit freethoughtforum.org/donate.